mean, so I decided. So I think I made that decision. I did my year at foundation, and I was a pattern maker, I suppose. I see things very much in two dimensions. I'm not very good on volume, and I sort of was pushed towards graphics. And it was a time when, anyway, the boys went to graphics, the girls went to textiles and fashion. It was a great division. And whilst I was at Middlesex, I started to work with fashion and with fashion elements, knitting and printmaking. And then I went to the Royal College and I did illustration. My MA was in illustration, but I always had a connection with fashion. So I started very early in my career working with fashion designers, and my drawings were very much about what I would call the modern world. So I was very interested in what people wore, where they ate, the music they listened to. So I wasn't really an illustrator who made pictures for children. I made pictures more for adults. So that was my career as my starting point. And then I left the Royal College, and I split between working with normal illustration ways of working, publishing, advertising, magazines, but also working with fashion designers. I mean, maybe some of you don't know, there was a designer called Jasper Conran, there was Betty Jackson, a series of English designers. And then from that, drawing was always really important to me. Drawing is essential, I think, for every designer. It is the bedrock, the foundation on which we base all our ideas and our practice. That's my opinion. I think it's I always say there's a thing I'm holding in my hand now, which is a pencil, and I think that is perhaps the most important tool any designer can have: a pencil and a piece of paper.
And why is drawing so important for your practice?
Because one for my practice is because I try. I mean, it's about resolving ideas and it's about resolving problems. So sometimes if it's so I draw in different ways. I draw sometimes observationally. So I will take a sketchbook with me and I will make notes and I'll draw what I see around me. But I'll also have more sort of conceptual ideas. And I think fashion designers need to be able to do both. They need to be observational and also conceptual, in the sense that they have to somehow, in their head, they have an idea. And I think it's very good to take that idea and put it onto a piece of paper. And then they can reflect on it. So you have an idea, you put an idea, I mean very basic here, an idea for a jacket. So you scribble down an idea for a jacket. You're in a cafe, you have a napkin, you scribble down an idea for a jacket. That idea, once it has been committed to paper, is a physical observation of that thought. So if it just remains in your head, it can be forgotten. But I think once you put it on the paper, it's there, it's a tangible thing, and you can reflect on it. Now, I realize many designers, in a way, work much more in 3D. They would like to work with fabric on the stand. And that's important as well, obviously. But I think it's very good to work in both ways. So for me, I always use there's a thing which I say about my imagination is quite good. I can remember things quite well. I think because I look all the time at things around me. So my example is if you ask me to draw a giraffe, I could draw a giraffe from my memory. A giraffe-like creature. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be a giraffe. And then the other way that I might draw is I go, okay, I'm going to, I need some more research or reference. So I might open a book, I might Google an image, and I might then draw the giraffe from the images I found. It becomes, maybe I become a little slavish. I become too aware of what the giraffe, you know, what the photograph is telling me rather than what I'm seeing. And then of course I, you know, if I can spend lots of money and go off to Africa or a zoo and I can draw a giraffe from life. But sometimes the imagined in a way is more real, more giraffe-like than maybe the research drawing. And maybe the giraffe moves too quickly, so you can't really draw it very well. But I think all of those ways of working are very important. So like if we go back to our jacket, we can draw a jacket from my imagination. Then what I would do is, if I was a designer, I would research jackets, designers who've made jackets, past and present, and look at those. And then if I would then look at jackets physically and see how they are actually constructed. So I would use my drawing in all those three ways, from my imagination, from my research, and from my observation, to pull together to make something. So I'm then using my drawing to then further my concept, my design.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was trying to catch this idea because I think it's really interesting and important. You mentioned this process of going from the drawing as an idea in a paper, and then the part of the research of the past and the present, and afterwards the observational part, like the real, the real contact with your idea. And I think that this process is really interesting to keep in mind. And I relate also everything you were saying about the importance of the practice of drawing in my case to journaling, because I'm not a designer, so it's similar, the idea that you're telling, to write down what you think and put that in words or in drawing as a creative. But it's really nice.
I mean, you know, I always think when you, I mean, one of the great things is, if, you know, when people apply for the college, and, you know, we don't see the full sketchbook now because obviously we're not seeing them physically, but at one time you would actually be given a sketchbook and you could see, so you're being invited into, in a way, their personal world, just like, you know, their personal thoughts, their personal, you know, ideas, and dialogue with themselves, just like a diary or a journal. In a way, for the writer, it's the journal or the diary. For the designer, artist, illustrator, fashion designer, it's the sketchbook. Yes. And both are, so you could then build up an archive in a way. If you know, I've got friends who've used the same sketchbook for 20 or 30 years, so they have exactly the same size sketchbook, and they've got this amazing archive. And of course, what happens as a designer, you know, if you put those ideas down, maybe that idea, that thought, isn't right for this moment, but it might be right for a later moment. So you become your own source. So your drawings that you've put into your sketchbook or your notepad or whatever become a resource for yourself. You know, you're not, you know, obviously, you know, there's nothing really new in the world. You know, it's very hard to create any new idea. But I think in a way is that if you're aware of what's going around, but also, you know, your ideas are your own ideas. I mean, they may be influenced by other things, but, you know, I think that's the interesting thing, is how you take something. And that's why I find teaching so fascinating, is how people's minds work, how a designer's mind work, what their starting point is. And I do harp on about to my students that drawing is really key to that. And also it should be going throughout the process, you know,
What do you
of
mean by that,
design.
Chris? What do
Well,
you
for example, so you may be working, drawing, for example, you could, so you've done your sketch, you've done your idea of the jacket. We'll go back to the jacket. You're starting to make the jacket, you're doing a toile of the jacket. You maybe then photograph that, and then you can actually then, draw over the photograph. You might want to sort of quickly, you can actually see without physically doing it, what a sleeve would look like if it was slightly narrower, what a lapel would look like if it was slightly narrower. So without actually, so you could then make quick decisions, a much faster decision with a pencil or a pen over a photograph than you could with unpinning, moving around, so then you can then decide that how you want to go forward. So really, that's what I'd say, is that drawing, when we see portfolios, we see the initial idea, we see drawing going throughout it. We see the other part of drawing is very much where we talk about research. So it's very easy to fill a notebook, a scrapbook with just photographs, but why are they there? So I think sometimes the drawing, the addition to drawing to a photograph is, why are you looking at a particular photograph? Is it just because it's a pretty image, or is there something within the structure or the design within that photograph that somehow you're looking at and you're wanting to note? So drawing is then used on other people's work as well. In a way, you're trying to understand. You're trying to understand what it is you are seeing in your research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand. You mentioned portfolio.
Yeah.
Well, Analia, she is a portfolio advisor also at Fat Connection. And are there any? No, not sure if she's, well, so.
I'm here. Yeah,
Okay,
I'm
okay.
here.
Okay. Do you want to make?
Yes, so I have some questions.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you, Chris, for your knowledge transfer and your time and sharing your experience with us. So I have a couple of questions. So the first one will be, how does drawing help your research, and how can be used as a tool?
Well, I think one is, obviously, I think drawing, how does it help your research? One is, I think it helps you try and understand your research. So one is, it's not just writing, oh, this is a very nice picture, oh, I like the color here. It's actually maybe using, I always think if you try and draw something, I'm thinking, whether it's prime research, you're going to a museum and you're drawing in a museum, then in a way you're trying to understand what it is you are seeing. Yes. If you just look at a photograph, and in a way you're always looking at a two-dimensional image, and I think it's very important. That's okay, because obviously sometimes you can't get to see something in 3 dimensions. But I think in a way we can look at the photograph and try and understand what it is and what we're trying to glean from that, trying to understand from that photograph. And I do think that annotation in some way, and it's not about drawing is important, I think, at all stages, and it's not about making beautiful pictures. I love seeing a designer's notebook, whether that's an architect or a product designer or a fashion designer. It's the quick ideas of putting down ideas quickly, almost not consciously in a way, just sort of the pencil, the pen, and the hand and the brain working all in coordination. That they're working together. You're not really trying to chew the pencil, trying to question what you're doing. So I think it's very important to try and get as many ideas down as possible, and not. I think too many people get fixated about the one thing, the one drawing. When I draw my work, when I'm looking at my own work, I will redraw it and I will redraw it until I'm happy with it. I draw, I can sketch. I'm not a natural fluid draftsman. Some people draw beautifully. They draw almost, if you see almost like Chinese calligraphy. It's very fluid. I'm much more of a, I'm sort of a slavish drawer, but I think drawing there is no right and wrong way to draw.
Oh, totally. And I think that there you're talking about like the value of process.
Totally. Totally.
So, and I agree, I totally agree. And I was wondering, like, how much of a creative portfolio is process or sketch material? Ooh. Like when I'm applying to a BA or a master's. No, I
think it's, again, it's not, there's not a rule. I think in a way it depends on the person and how important they there's a sort of mantra, isn't there? Like, it's research, development, outcome. And obviously, so your research will involve drawing, sketchbook work, your development will involve construction, experimentation, maybe further drawing, more notes. I mean, I don't think it's like, you don't say, oh, it's a third of this, a third of this, a third of this. I think it depends how important that person thinks that is within their practice. Some people will draw and draw and draw until they feel they've got it right. I mean, or, some people want to just immediately, fashion designers immediately want to just get some fabric in their hands and just do something with it. I think other people might want to draw more. I mean, if you look at one of those, I mean, Karl Lagerfeld, for example, I mean, I'm just taking him for example because he always described himself as an illustrator. And, I think he drew beautifully. So he had to conceptualize very much on paper as a drawing before he actually then, had his ladies make his fabric, had, his seamstresses cut it for him. But I mean, it was very much, he had to think about this thing as it was very real in his head. And he had to then translate that into a reality on paper, which then was translated into a reality in 3 dimensions.
Well, you mentioned illustration. Can you explain a little more about the difference between a drawing and illustration?
I mean, there's so many fabulous fashion illustrators, and I've done fashion illustration. I used to illustrate for the Sunday Times and the Financial Times. So my illustration, I think, there's drawing where, in a way, the drawing is where it's almost observational. You have the garment in front of you, or you imagine the garment. You're not really giving it any sense of place. I think illustration is where you give it a sense of place. So the illustrator, if you look at, in the 20s and 30s, there were wonderful photographers. If you look at Vogue covers in the 20s and 10, for the first part of the 20th century really were illustrative. There were covers which were, fashion was created by illustration rather than photography. And it was about, and of course, photographers are very imaginative, but illustrators can create an extraordinary imagination reality in a way, or unreality. So I think that's the difference. An illustrator can make a world. Usually with drawing, you're not really involved. You're maybe just looking very much at the object, the thing itself. And there's not, and I mentioned there's an illustrator I love very much called Jackie Blue, who I think is a wonderful illustrator, I mean, he takes it's partly drawing, partly illustration. It's obviously, there's an observational quality to it. And then you look at Mats Gustafsson is an amazing fashion illustrator. And then there's people like Pierre Latin who worked very much. And then there's I think in a way it's very important to, what I like to see is, as a child, we draw almost naturally. We're not worried about, whether the hands are right or the face is right. I mean, and then when we get older, we get very conscious about making a good drawing. And I think I would almost want to see people, a portfolio or work, to have a more of a spontaneity about it. I think in a way that's what it needs, is not to worry too much whether you're getting the proportion exactly right. I have trouble drawing hands. I think a lot of us do. So I try to find a way of hiding them in some way. Often if I draw men, their hands are in their pockets, for example, or holding something rather than having to draw fingers. So I think we find our own language, our own way of tackling drawing. But it should, drawing is like handwriting. It's so individual to the person.
Yes, it's really interesting, because I'm finding like a whole new concept of preparation. What we do as in Fat Connection, we basically help students apply to university and get to creative careers in different parts of the world. So, but I think I was not conscious about the importance of drawing and practicing this skill, so it's interesting.
And also, I think often you see, I think this rate where you can say, for example, going back to our research, you can take you can find something. You could find it could be an inanimate object, or it could be a piece of clothing, and you can draw out of that. So that could be, you can collage that into your sketchbook, cut something out, a shell or something, and draw out from that. So you're using that as a starting point for your imagination, but also consideration about how you might use this thing to help your design. So it's not just about always using your imagination. It's about, you may start with, some people create collages and then they draw from the collage. So they're creating a silhouette out of, and then drawing away from that as well. Sorry, yes.
No, that I think that's really interesting, how drawing is like a connector in between arts, this dialogue in between maybe drawing and then photography, and then drawing or doing different interventions in this photography, and creating this kind of hybrid in between art disciplines.
I think it's painful. I'm not sort of a Luddite. I don't believe in just you only use a pencil. I mean, you can draw with a pair of scissors. You can cut shapes. That's drawing. Matisse was drawing with scissors.
Yes.
I mean, you can draw with light. I mean, photography. I mean, you can use. I mean, there's a way of using photography in drawing as well. I think you can work into a photograph. So I'm not just saying it's got to be very purist. It's really sort of be about for me, often the drawing can be the outcome. For a designer, often the drawing is not the outcome. It can be if it is the conceptualization. For example, if we look at the artist Christo did lots of drawings conceptualizing how he would wrap something. He wasn't going to go about and wrap up, the Eiffel Tower or whatever, without thinking what it would look like first of all. So you can use drawing very much as a conceptualization as well, and that could be the outcome. So maybe, not when we look at portfolios of fashion, not everything has to be made. Sometimes it is a conceptual idea about what you might be making.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm. Well, at the beginning, you mentioned that you had a great inspiration and imagination. Imagination, you said. How do you cultivate this imagination yourself?
Well, I mean, I'm an old gentleman now, so I've been around a long time, so I've seen lots of things, and of course, I have a, I think that in the generation now, they're very privileged in one way, but they're also disadvantaged in other ways, because in a way everything is available. You can click a button and images just come up. And I think there's something about discovery where, you know, you could go to, if you go to a library, there are things, you look through books and you discover things. It's not, you don't just Google an image, you Google whatever, and up comes images, and they've been selected for you. You know, I think it's very nice that you can go and select things yourself. So I think what I always say is that you don't go out and look, you know, it's not, you know, we're not all, you know, I'm very privileged in London. I've got so many museums I can go to, there's so many exhibitions, you know, cinemas. Not everyone comes from that privileged background. Some people live in small rural areas. It doesn't, they should, but that's in a way, maybe their imagination, maybe they are better off in a way. We're very spoilt somehow. I think we're, you know, I want to try and tell people that, you know, go out and look. I mean, I think that's the main thing. You know, you go out, if you want to observe the world, go in a cafe and just watch, people watch. You know, I think sometimes, you know, and again about fashion, what do people wear? What do people, how do people look? What is my body type that I'm designing for? I mean, I think that's all about that is something you're observing. And I don't, and I still, and I take lots of photographs, and I use photography in conjunction with drawing as my aide de memoire. It helps me remember things if I haven't got time, but I use it, you should be able to pull together all these elements, observational things, you know, looking, reading, seeing movies. I mean, you know, everything is, you know, we're surrounded with so much richness in our world, whether it's nature or you know, books or films. So that helps our imagination. And I suppose I was lucky. I have an older sister, a much older sister, but I was an only child. So in a strange way, as an only child, sometimes you create more of an imaginative world than if you've got lots of brothers and sisters running around you and you haven't got that time in a way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And when talking about, do you have any special recommendation for somebody that's creating a portfolio for any purpose? I mean, to apply to university or to work or to present a collection, any purpose. What
I always think, you know, what, you know, I always think it's a portfolio, or anything really is a narrative. So really you are telling me, you know, what is the once upon a time? What is the story you want to tell? And how does that story unfold? So you can make it a very long story or a very short story. And I think that's the thing. So you may want to do a lot more, you know, description. So the drawing, the sketchbook might be the setting of the scene, the description of the place, of the mood, of the feeling, of the characters. And then we unfold. So I think that's, so it's up to the individual. It's not, I think the portfolio, if we're going to say a portfolio, is really, it's a physical representation of the person. So I may not meet the person, but somehow when I look at the portfolio, I should be able to see within the portfolio their interests, their motivation, their ambition. You know, it's not all about making lots and lots of work. Sometimes that can be rather off-putting. It's not just having hundreds of little drawings or hundreds of, you know, iterations of one outfit. It can be just beautifully put together. I think it's very hard. It's hard putting together a portfolio, you know, for anyone. But it should, you know, it all depends on what level they're at. You know, obviously, when you're younger, you want to see a portfolio that shows lots of different ways of approaching work. Obviously, when you're doing an MA, it's a much more, you've got a language, whether it's a two-dimensional language or a three-dimensional language, and you're really showing off your concepts, your ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And do you suggest or recommend to put mixed disciplines within, I mean, no matter what you want to show, for example, if you're a fashion designer, do you suggest putting inside your portfolio different skills from different things that maybe it's not specific of the fashion, but that you think makes the story nicer or clearer?
I think it's up to, I think that's a very much, you know, some people are just interested in the garment. Other people are very much interested in, you know, I mean, they may be interested in actually where the garment, maybe the contextualization of it. So they may be showing, you know, the jewelry that you want. So they may be designing jewelry, they may be designing footwear, or maybe designing accessories. They may even be designing, I mean, they may be acting more like an art director as well. You know, if you think of all the art directors, say Kim Jones, for example, I'm sure he has very much strong input about how he wants the show to look.
Yeah.
And the models he wants to choose. So one is, I think, is especially to an MA, is like, you know, to try and identify through drawing, through photography, however, is who is the person you're designing for, and how you're contextualizing your work. So do you see your work in a more fine art world, or do you see it in much more, I use the word commercial in a very broad sense of the word. I mean, so commercial for me is, you know, if you make one outfit and one person wants it, then you have made something which is commercial because someone wants that thing you've made. It could be 10 things you make, and then that's still commercial, or it could be 1,000 things, you know. So it's commerciality it's not a bad word. It's actually, you're wanting someone to buy something you are making. What's wrong with that?
No, totally. Well, we will open the space to questions. If you want to anybody wants to make questions in the chat to Chris, please, we welcome. So if nobody has questions, Chris, I want to continue like on this idea of how to prepare the portfolio, and which advice do you have to somebody that wants to, you were talking just now about the commercial piece, no? So if you have somebody that's wanting to start their own business, this is like quite a normal question that we receive, students wanting to prepare a collection, for example, or to show or to present the work. What would you suggest?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think you're, if you're making it, then obviously I would still think you need to show some sort of the mood you're creating. So what is the feeling of the collection? You don't need to show lots. Maybe you're selecting imagery. Now, I think that's very important. I think one is about, everyone has a camera. We can take photographs of things we like, which we feel relevant to us and our work. And obviously I think it's very boring if you're always relying on found imagery. Now, obviously sometimes if it's historic imagery or painting or something, that's fine. So I think one is that, and then it's to take us through the process. So if it was commercial, then obviously, and I'm talking of drawing, maybe I think people are thinking I'm drawing, I'm talking about drawing being artistic. I'm not. I'm thinking it's actually a tool for designers. So, I think it's very important for if you're thinking about, a commercial, applying for a job, for example, with a designer or design group, then to show them specific, technical drawings. I think you need to show how you analyze what you've designed. So it's very important to show them that you can draw technically as well as quickly and imaginatively. So I think that's the whole thing, is you should be able to, drawing is, at the very end of a portfolio, often you'll see a technical drawing. Now, if you're applying for an MA, I don't think there's a need to show endless technical drawings.
Yeah.
Show one, show you can do it, show you understand it. It's not, I mean, we're creating, the MA at CSM is really about creating designers or how people want to define themselves as a designer. So we don't have we don't say this is what you have to do. It's not a technical process. You're not really there to learn a technique. You're there to investigate yourself as a designer and what you want. It's not what we want. We are there only to help you and maybe provoke you into pushing yourselves to be a better version of what's already there.
Great. Well, we have a lot of questions in the chat. I'm going to try to translate all of them. Well, I start with Cristina. Cristina, she's asking if for you it's possible from the commercial point of view to create personalized and unique clothes.
Of course, yes. I mean,
exclusive clothes, yeah.
Yeah, well, I was, of course it is, because I think I mean, whether you're, because in a way it's part of the identity. I mean, even the biggest commercial brands have identity. So in a way, so you as a younger designer should be able to, I think it's about thinking about who you are designing for and where you see your work sitting within this world. I mean, if for example, you are making a collection and you're making a collection that's going to sell in a department store, for example, and they might have lots of other designers. Who are the designers that you might be sitting next to? Why would they choose you? You might be sportswear. So what sort of sportswear are you designing? Are there other sportswear designers who are doing similar things? So I think you, especially if you are thinking of becoming a designer, I think it's showing, one is you've got to be aware of what's around, but you've got to be not influenced by what's around as well. You've got to be true to your voice as a designer. I think fashion, in a strange way, I think fashion it has a bad word because it seems to be, I think we have to redefine fashion in this new world, because fashion to me always meant fast change of the moment. I think in a way we have to think about a much longer fashion. When I see people like, the big houses again, still producing, 140 or some ridiculous number of outfits, it seems ridiculous, stupid in a way. I think in a way we have to go back to a smaller world, a more considered world. So I think maybe that's why I'm saying, if you are a designer, it may be that you're refining, and that's why the drawing comes in. You're refining your ideas. You're putting your ideas down. You're refining them constantly. But I think really, so for going back to that, I think it's, it's really to be aware of who you are, and to be aware of where you want to be within the design community. And I don't think there's a hierarchy between, whether you're designing for skateboarders or whether you're designing for red carpet. There's not one is more important than another. It's really about what you want to design. And good design is good. I think, good design, it can be a ball gown. It could be a t-shirt and a pair of shorts.
Yeah, totally. I'm taking notes because I find interesting this last part about who you are designing for, some crucial questions at the moment that you're somebody's preparing a portfolio such as this one. Who are you designing for? Who will be the designer sitting next to you? And yeah.
And also, I think that what is interesting about also what he was talking about inspiration is like what do you want to say? Of course, like what is I don't know if you want to make a fashion collection about whatever concept, but or if it's for a master's or for a BA project, but I think that the most important thing is like, what do you want to say? And about the inspiration subject that he talked previously is like being present. And like if you are present, I mean, you can be living in London or you can be living in the countryside, but just like being present and just say or draw or write whatever you think is significant for you, and what you want to say to the world, I think. And yeah, that's really interesting. And also I think that there's a question about inspiration. Yep. I don't find it now, but
I was going to say about inspiration. Can I just say something about inspiration? Because I've been when I've been teaching for a long time, you get students, with their head in their hands, trying to think of something, and I've done that very many times. What I will tend to do is I will go out and I'll go for coffee and I'll try and resolve an idea in the time it takes to have a cup of coffee. I think you can't. I mean, I would say if you really feel stuck at something, I think this is where drawing comes in. I would say take yourself off to a museum, take yourself off into the woods and do some drawing. Just clear your head. Use it as a sort of a period of meditation in a way.
You're answering the question of Rosario, that she's asking what you answered. How do you deal with moments of low inspiration and frustration? And you just said it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I think that's really interesting, like just like being aware of what's happening around you. And maybe there are like these little triggers that maybe are related to your culture, your history, to your, I don't know, like to your context.
And I think that's the problem, maybe again, I think that's the whole thing, because fashion has become so fast, with the big designers doing 4 collections or however many collections a year, you're thinking, how the hell do they do it? And I think in a way, it's sort of, you don't expect, I mean, you can be a writer and only produce 1 book and be remembered for 1 book. As an artist, you might be remembered for a few paintings, Vermeer. But most of us are not, you've got to do a lot of work to be remembered, to actually have a history in a way. And I feel that, one is perhaps is to be a slower process. Don't, build on, that's why I say maybe if you build an archive of your work and your ideas, you're looking at that and it's becoming a consistent, one of my favorite designers is Yoshi Yamamoto. I like Comme des Garçons as well, but when I look at Yoshi Yamamoto, I go, okay, there's work in the 80s and 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and in a strange way, it's like I could throw things in from different decades and it wouldn't look out of place. And I think so I think he's been very true to himself as a designer and his own language. I think in a way is to be aware of what's going on around, but don't have a knee-jerk reaction to what's going on around. That's why I say, don't think, oh God, I've got to do it. I've got to do this because everyone else is doing this. I think that can be, in the short term, can be rewarding, but in the long term, it's probably not so. And it's probably you're devaluing your creativity if you do that.
Yeah, I agree. And we have a question from Sophia that she is asking you, how do you find or how do you define style if you're still a young designer? What recommendation would you have for her, either for design or drawing or illustration?
Oh, I see. For design, well, I think you've just got to try lots of different materials. I think if you want to be, I would say is don't always use the same pen. Try different ways of working. No, I think I have a style, but that style is constantly evolving. I become maybe sometimes trapped because I'm asked to do by a client to do something, but when I'm doing work for myself, and I think that's what I do, is I'm trying to make work for myself where I can be more playful. I think that is don't box yourself in too much. Don't get too worried. I think that's the problem. Is one is for example, if you're one thing is that we know, if you're as a fashion designer, we want you to be able to think about the silhouette, the figure. So one is to try and establish what your body type is. And some people find it really hard to draw a figure. So there's nothing wrong in using a template, but actually adapting that to make it your own. So don't always look like it's a paper doll. It should have something of your own character to it. So that can be I use a paper called layout paper, which is when I do a drawing, it's a very thin, it's quite a sort of thinnish paper, and I can draw, and then I can put it under another piece of paper and draw over it. So sometimes if you keep on drawing over and over again, that loosens you up. It gives you a little more style. I mean, I think style, you can't make style overnight. Style evolves. I think, but I think when you're younger, I think it's very important to copy, to look at, to emulate, and then through that you start developing your own way of drawing or designing, I suppose, as well.
This is a great advice, Chris, because it's the first time for me that I hear, and I totally agree and understand what you want to say about like when you're young, start copying, emulating, and finding out what you feel comfortable of. It's really interesting.
My great nephew, he's 5.5.
Yeah.
He draws beautifully, really well. But there's a very famous illustrator in England called Quentin Blake, and he's been copying his drawings. And of course, there's nothing wrong in that, because he's actually really looking and trying to understand how someone is drawing, and then he'll then draw in his own style as well.
Great. Okay, we need to go closing up with the questions. So, Analia, do you have anything else you would like to add?
No, I just think that this space is amazing. Thank you, Chris, for all your experience and knowledge. Thank you very much.
What I would like to say is that if anyone is thinking of applying to any of the University of Arts colleges, whether it's fashion or illustration or product design or architecture, that myself and my colleagues are there to help you. And obviously you will be there to advise them, and we'll be offering portfolio advice, workshops, I'm sure, in the coming months, this year. Don't think it's beyond, it's not like a sort of some high mountain. I mean, really be brave. If you're thinking of applying, we're there to help you put together a portfolio for whatever level, and we look forward to seeing the work. Really, I think that's what it is, and be true to yourselves.
And just one last curiosity I have regarding one of your classes with at the MA of illustration. Can you tell me about the kind of student that would take this MA? How can you describe the type of person that would apply to an MA on illustration?
Well, I mean, I think that's like any MA. I think one is they have a background, but their background can be, often some people from apply to an MA because they come from a different discipline. For example, some of my best students on the MA illustration have been academic. They've done archaeology, or they've done psychology or history, but they've got a passion for the subject. I think it's having a passion for what, I mean, again, it's what you want what you want out of the MA. What we you know, the staff on any MA are there to help you achieve what you want, but you've actually got to come knowing some idea of what you want from it. What is your ultimate goal?
Yeah.
You know, after 15 months or however long an MA is. So I mean, so you know, I think anyone on an MA comes with some sort of, you know, they've developed a sort of personal language. You know, and whether it's when I was teaching illustration, I wouldn't be standing over them saying, no, you draw a hand like this, no, you draw a face like this. It's more of a dialogue. It's you know, you're discussing with them. You might comment on a composition or something. You don't really tell them what they should be doing.
Great.
So one is, I think, you know, one is I would expect on an illustration, you know, some people drawing, I mean, some people doing it digitally. That's not, you know, it's not, it doesn't have to be painting or acrylic or gouache or pen and ink. It's, you know, it can be, you know, comic book in a way. It can be traditional children's illustration. It can be more conceptual. It can be print. I mean, again, it's a very broad church.
Great. Well, I really hope that everybody that's listening today to you go to buy a sketchbook if they don't have, and start drawing today in the lunch. Yeah.
Well, it's been very nice talking to you all, and yeah, you know, I'd say, you know, it's a great discipline, I think. Whether you're just drawing from imagination or observation, or from, you know, try to implement all that within your portfolio eventually.
Great.
Thank you. Gracias to you as well.
Muchas gracias. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.